Okay, folks, so let's continue on with problem 4 here. So we have Keiko here, and she has this function called g of x, and she or he wrote down the description for how this function works. First thing, you add 5, you divide by 2, you cube it, and then you multiply by 6. The very first question is asking, what is the equation for g of x? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and answer that. We have g of x, and we know that it's going to have an input, so the input first is added by 5, then that number, that quantity, is divided by 2, then that quantity is cubed, so to include the whole thing, I'm going to use parentheses to the third power, and this entire quantity here is being multiplied by 6. So there is g of x. Okay, now, in B it says, what is the output when 3 is the input? So let's see. What is the output when 3 is the input? So another way of thinking about this question is they're asking, what is g of 3? So then I get 3 plus 5, that's 8. Half of 8, that's 4. 4 cubed, oh, that's a big number. 4 times 4, 16. 16 times 4, that's 64. That's what this is, a 64. And then 64 times 6, let me use a calculator for that part. Oops, there we go. 64 times 6, I believe it's 384. There we go, perfect. So 384. So then g of 3 is 384. There, that's the output when the input is 3. Then it says, help Keiko write down the steps in words of the inverse machine, g inverse of x, and write its equation. Okay, so the steps. So I'm going to write the steps. I'll write them here. The regular machine, let me record them so they're side by side. So the regular machine adds 5. Then it divides by 2. It's then cubed, and then it's multiplied by 6. This is how the regular machine works. Now, if we think of the analogy of the gift being wrapped, here's the adding by 5, here's the multiplying and the cubing, and so what we're trying to do is undo all of that. So to undo this gift here, that's being to undo this function that's adding layers of operations on the input, just like this recipe here describes, what we have to do is start with the last layer. Okay, that's where we start to undo things. And again, here's the analogy of an onion. If you wanted to peel an onion, what you do is you start with the outer layer first, whatever the last operation was, and then you work your way in. You don't start at the middle or at the center. So you always start at whatever the last thing was. So to find the undo function, I'm not going to start with the plus 5. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the multiplication by 6. So to undo, I need to figure out, how do I undo multiplication by 6? So that's dividing by 6. Then I go in layers. The next operation was the cubing. So to undo the cube, I cube root. To undo the division by 2, I multiply by 2. To undo the addition of 5, I add 5.